I'd like to thank the Imagine Fund, whose special events grant paid the costs for our videographer and space and modest honorariums for the poets. And I'd like to thank the Martin Library and the Department of English, Linguistics, and Writing Studies, who are great partners always in making cool things happen. And I'd like to thank students in my grant writing class. Raise your hand, you're awesome. Who are learning how to write grants for events like these. And I'd like to thank you all for coming, and then I'd like to hand it off to Jess of the League of Minnesota Poets Duluth Poetry Chapter, the organization of poets that meets every week and are keeping poetry alive in new and exciting ways in our town.
Thank you again, David, for organizing the Poet Laureate series and for having the Duluth Poetry Chapter on board. So we are going to bring on a poet from the Duluth Poetry Chapter in a moment, but just a couple of quick words about our chapter. So as David said, we do meet every Sunday at noon, but we're going to be switching our time to 1 to accommodate the rush hour of the coffee shop, the brunch hour. So over at Dovetail at 1, we'll switch and give any updates about switching times like that as we follow the flow of things through our email group and also through the Facebook page. So if you ever want updates, that's where to find them. And then we're going to bring on Rebecca Palmer today. So let's give Rebecca a round of applause while she comes up here.
Hello. I'm going to start with a poem that I recently edited called I Keep Walking. White and orange cigarette stub kisses his upper lip, with smoke furling above his head, a can of Oktoberfest bests in his hand, and I keep walking. A ring through her bottom lip, a low-cut top, her arms wrapped around the woman's hips in front of her, and I keep walking. A downcast, sideways glance as she clutches a child to her enlarged breasts, a man glaring at his hands, his boot thudding against the chair she sits in, and I keep walking. A sallow-faced female trying to keep 3 boys from misbehaving as she averts the gaze of her father, or is that her husband, and I keep walking. How many more souls and how many more tableaus will I keep walking past because I don't want to admit the lives I'm seeing are not sins? I'm walking past people who feel who they are is the action they're performing. Treating their roles as invisible only dehumanizes their souls. Pointing out the obvious outward ruses just keeps people locked up in their cages, their boxes, their labels. How many more souls and how many more tableaus will you keep walking past? Because you don't care, you're uncomfortable, you're not at fault. As many as you can so you can keep denying who you are, your spouse is, your society is, your world is. See yourself. Come out of your mask, replace your roles with self-comfort, take yourself into freedom, and then you will start walking with the people living their lives around you. And I brought with me a book I self-published called Map of My Heart. I did most of the poems in here, or edited them while I was at a retreat in Wisconsin called Cyrenaica. The boy with red curls and bells on his toes. My second and youngest brother was not quite a year when I lay expiring of cancer, but he could still toddle along the hospital hallways and visit me when I was receiving chemotherapy. The nurses all loved him because of his red, curly hair and bright blue eyes. You could hear him coming, jingle, jangle, clang, clang. Mom tied tiny silver bells to his shoelaces so we didn't lose him on the oncology floor. Mom is also scared he might get on an elevator and get off on a different floor, like nephrology, ophthalmology, dermatology, rheumatology, and he would be lost forever. Cancer equals love. I was lying in a hospital bed, dying from a lump with the name B-cell lymphoma, when my mother, father, and brother came into the room to hold my hand. The silence in the room was killing us all softly when my dad and mom whispered, "I love you." I looked at my brother, who couldn't seem to speak. The cancer had reached inside him and began to hurt him too. My dad nudged my brother to tell your sister I love you, and I heard him say, I love you. Thank you.
So we're going to bring up our first Poet Laureate of the evening. She's putting together an event that's coming up on November 6th, which I'm sure we'll hear about too. Let's give a round of applause for Sheila Pekka.
Thank you, Jess. I have some information about that on the table back there. Well, I want to thank David Beard and the students that he's been working with for sort of bringing the Duluth Poet Laureate sort of, what would it be, memorial? And hopefully, not a memorial, no, that would be a revival, yes, a revival meeting. I was the Poet Laureate in 2010 to 2012, which is 10 years ago now. For each Poet Laureate, our mission was to promote poetry and to expand the audience. And the Poet Laureate would organize 5 events over a period of 2 years with the help of a wonderful group called the Duluth Poet Laureate Committee. And they did so much to keep the program going for so many years. So I'm really happy to hear that there is interest in people who are hoping to sort of get together and get the program back up and running. It's been a really good experience. And it does put Duluth on the map. You know, I think it's really good for the cultural life of the community. Well, today is my dad's birthday. He's no longer with us in life, but this poem is called Not Forgotten. I learned to ride the 2-wheeled bicycle with my father. He oiled the chain, clothes-pinned playing cards to the spokes, put on the basket to carry my lunch. By his side, I learned balance and took on speed, centered behind the wide handlebars, my hands on the white grips, my feet pedaling. One moment, he was holding me up, and the next moment, although I didn't know it, he had let go. When I wobbled, suddenly afraid, he yelled, keep going, keep going. Beneath the trees in the driveway, the distance increasing between us, I eventually rode until he was out of sight. I counted on him. That he could hold me was a given. That he could release me was a gift. This poem is called, it's one of the early poems that I wrote, called Loom. When I was a girl, my mother tore suits and dresses into strips and wound them up into balls, wool and cotton, silk and satin, dark rainbows that couldn't be clouded by the dust that rose in that destruction, geological hues tied with a zeal. The cat chased those tales endlessly, and when all this was done, my mother descended with her baskets to the loom in the basement, the big creaking frame threaded with string sunsets and daybreak brilliance, with foot pedals bigger than a piano's, and rhythms that were like shifts in the heart or quakes underground. She threw the shuttle and pounded the bar against the rags of the past, so rugs came reeling out, all warp and weft, and her breathless. Even now, I feel her rhythms in the everyday disasters, feel the need to tear my clothes, get down to the most basic elements. I want to somehow, in the heartbeat of the dark and in the lap of great effort, take the threads of the past and bring up something new. I often write about rivers, and I have written a lot about the Iron Range. The Iron Range is a unique culture. I don't know, how many of you are Iron Rangers? Oh, okay, so you know it. There's a lot of industrial activity, taconite plants. I worked in a taconite plant for a while when I was in college during the summer. And my father worked in the mine for a while and then had another job later driving heavy equipment for the township instead of Reserve Mining Company. So this poem is from, I have a book called Night Train Red Dust, which is a book of poems that kind of came out of the archives. I was looking for stories about my grandmother. She came from Finland in like 1917, something like that. All four of my grandparents came from the same region in Finland. But I couldn't find anything about her. There was nothing written, and she didn't speak English, so I didn't have her stories really, except a few from my mother. And so I went to the archives to find out what the community was like when she came. And so this book is all these stories of all these people who I discovered. But this is the first poem in the book. My geology. I excavate these words from a vein of iron, from stones broken beneath old growth, from the open pit, lit by dynamite, by men whose lives are punctuated by midnights, who drive new cars to the plant, the crusher and the agglomerator, and later suffer mesothelioma. I drive in acid rain, my compass gone awry over protozoic layers with four-wheel drive, aware of reverse polarity. These words are test drills and core samples from the boundary waters. These words, wrung from the whistles and wheels that turn, have never been projected into boardrooms. I have yet to wield these powers or capitalize or see the returns. I claim my words from the broken English, damaged roots, finished syntax, and geomagnetic fields, from eminent domain, small print, unreadable clauses. I find my vowels from labor contracts and mine dumps, factories and invisible contamination. My words in the runoff and open streams oxidize, form like tree rings in industrial circles, heat in the smelters, pour like lava into steel, form these rails that carry the trains, and these trains that carry this freight. I think if you grow up there, your body absorbs the minerals, wherever you're from. You know, Barry Lopez said, the place where we come up becomes part of our psychic landscape. And I think that's very true. And probably because we all are part of the environment, the landscape is in us and expresses itself in us. Echo and Lightning is this book I had written while I was thinking about stories in religious texts. Like oftentimes when women have an encounter with the divine, it's cataclysmic. It's so I have Leda and the Swan poems, and I have Mary Magdalene, and I have Mary, the Annunciation poems in here. But because it's fall, I thought I would read a few poems. A journey, yes. Wind turns the body, and ground falls away. Geese, unafraid of silence or empty sky, must go, must go, must go. Reach into the wind, move as clouds rimmed with sunlight or dark cloud of rain, need to follow their flight. Like ice in the spring that once held the river, light surges in the veins, searches for the beginning of a journey. Yes, music you haven't heard, didn't know you needed, opens deep. If you answer when you hear their call, the geese in loose and shifting lines from land to sea to cloud cross the evening sun, red on clouds of plum, over rivers inlaid in gold upon the slopes, over borders. If you need to leave, in every country we are born to the same body. Wind, inimitable, invisible forces change us beyond reach. If you make the sky your home, it isn't easy. You can't bring those things. Wrap in those lines, cross with them. And this is my new book, Surface Displacements. Surface Displacements has a lot of associations for me. One had to do with mining and excavation, removal of minerals in the Iron Range, so mine pits. It was also about migration because all four of my grandparents were immigrants. They came here with nothing. My grandmother had a suitcase on the way here that was stolen in Toronto, so she absolutely has zero. And they did get land, they homesteaded, and they survived. It wasn't easy, and they went through a lot of trials and difficulty, but it's part of the story. And there's so many immigrants. Every time I open the paper, you hear about refugees or people who are desperate and trying to cross the border. And I think our culture really needs to be a little more empathic for these people who must find a way. They must find a way to work with them so they can work. So displacements has to do with that movement of people as well. And it also has to do with rivers and erosion and things like that. I started to research on river characteristics, and I learned that as rivers flow forward, there is an opposing force that causes them to go deeper into the valley that they're flowing in, and it cuts deeper into the valley, and the waterfalls, if the river has a waterfall, will move backwards. And so that interesting fact was very appealing to me. So there's a lot of opposing forces. So this book is all water energy. And this is the first poem. It's called In the Water-Filled Mine Pit. In the boat, I slide over her body, the excavation. She is slag. She is crushed stone, unburied geologic Masabi iron. I drift over knee and shin and float over her shattered self heaped upon the earth, over boulders submerged, veins broken open, emptied and made into freight. A cold current from the drift. The bow lifts. She is bedrock, the bottom of the continent. Through her runs dark and invisible rivers without shore. She is the divide. In the seams of the tectonic plates, she is lit with dynamite and extracted, mined, carried by trains to the ships. I see a shoulder of iron. In place of her spine, a deep shaft. Remined, she becomes steel, becomes bridge, becomes beam, ship and tank and weapon. At the end, junk in the junkyards, rusting into weeds. The vessel turns like the needle of a compass broken from its post. I hear the tail splash of a trout. Fish spiral along the perimeter inside the pit. Inside a winding road once traveled in ships by men in hard hats and dump trucks and steam shovels. The trout tend the broken cables, the skeletal rusted frames. Here the hold displacing, stained with ore, the water feels like ice. It rises. Engineers call it water gain. Precipitation, surface water inflow, a rise in the water table is a threat to the walls of the pit. Light falls, but can't find bottom 300 feet below. Circles tumble and bend beneath the water's surface. I hear gravel sliding in. I hear insects and birds' wings over the factory of the deep. Cold blue from afar, but near, the water goes amber. It magnifies the hand that I plunge beneath the surface. It breaks the lines of my body, her body, the vessel. Ore rises into dust, condenses into a red mist of atoms, becomes discharge. We break the surface, we sink and rise. And that's the end of my reading.
So like the other two readings, all of the poet laureates have selected another poet to follow their reading. Today we're going to hear from Dani Pirata. So if you want to come up and let's give her a round of applause.
Bonjour, hello, I'm Dani Paradas, and I come from the Lake Vermilion district of the Bois Forte Band of Chippewa up in northeastern Minnesota. Fortune Bay Resort Casino, our claim to fame. If you guys know where that's at, I live right down the road. Chi Miigwech, thank you, Dave and Jess and Sheila for allowing me to be here today. My main job and work is in like food justice and that sort of realm, food sovereignty. Because it's a way to come back to health and well-being, and it brings everybody together because we all love good eats. But my poems aren't really centered on food. It's just life experiences here. And so without further ado, here we go. This one is a prayer poem to the grandmas. There we go. I think that my value system is just relative to the position that I happen to find myself in. I can see why religions had to write it all down on paper just to make sure we were on the same page. My people, we burn sage. I hear it's good for the soul, so good that they wrote it down on birch bark scrolls, but we don't really read those anymore, yet that's not to say that we don't need them anymore. In fact, I prayed to my grandmothers daily, grandmothers, come and save me. Otherwise, I am subjected to the dirty lyrics of a rap song, and all they have to say is, shake it all night long. Grandmothers, though 1,000 years of hard-earned righteous learning had been punched and pillaged out of you, I'm still looking for you to tell me what to do, grandmothers. I'm not on a mission for purity, but for respect. I've reached my hand out for love, but all I've touched is neglect, grandmothers. I know what I'm asking is simple, albeit not easy. But for now, hold my hand, stand me up, and dust me off. This next one is Dear Mr. Prosecutor. When I was trying to find this for the event today, I actually found a letter I had that was Dear Mr. Prosecutor for one of my relatives. And then I read that first and came back to the poem. I didn't make any changes, but I thought it was interesting. I'm like, wow, I wrote the poem before I had wrote that letter and I forgot about it, so it brought back a lot of stuff. So, Dear Mr. Prosecutor, well really, how do you explain to a prosecutor the plight of the people, epidemics that have all but wiped us out, them not being our fault? Being only able to feel comparison between ourselves and a cockroach. The only way to get rid of me is to stomp me out. However, I will be the ghost on your back. Whenever you want to think of justice, I will spill more blood from my place as the thorn in your side. I'll be that ever constant and annoying reminder of rape and ethnocide, of disease. You can find them encapsulated in me, the defendant on the defensive since colonial times. This next one is called Breathe, and it came from an essay I wrote for Climate Generation. They had eyewitness testimony that went to all the legislators in a beautiful poetry essay type book. So this was adapted as a sort of poem called Breathe. Earth's ice caps breathe just as we do. Inhales draw snow-covered landscapes in for warmer southern seasons, and exhales to draw them down for the winter months. The depths of Earth's breasts are getting shorter now, the snow and ice caps not flowing as far down as they used to. Their retreat cycles to the northern and southern poles are quickened like a human hyperventilation episode. I feel the tightness and the constriction of the Earth's cycles. My mother, a 60-year-old woman, fierce and strong, has started to have breathing problems from working in a taconite mine on the Iron Range of northern Minnesota. She struggles to catch her breath sometimes, kind of like what I'm doing now, yet she adapts and powers on. I see my mother fighting to sustain herself until the end of her days. I imagine Mother Earth is fighting in just the same way. Together, they are teaching me to remain resilient in the face of change, to accept responsibility and face it bravely. There is still so much we can do to support the Earth's changes. We just have to find our connection and empathy to access motivation, and I pray we all find it soon. This next one is called The Experience of You, and I think the background on it will come out in the poem. In grandiosity, I thought writing about you would turn out to be an epic tell-all. It's been so long that I can't quite remember what experience had me say I would contextualize the experience of you in a poem and share it. Just to note, this isn't the poem just yet. What I really meant to say is I would uplift my honor by writing you down, and I never did it. Before I could, you headed south so abruptly, just a couple days warning, where it is warmer and less wild, with more people who can embrace your sunshine because you need that, and the city life where you can let your personality run free and find your next queen. Asked me to follow, but my family is here, so I stay cold on the Iron Range. And over the years, I can't believe it's been years now, the loop of you in memory continues, and I still experience you. But nostalgia is turning to rot. My son reminded me that rotten apples always fall from the tree. So I'll let you finally fall away with the lesson and the poem you gave me. Watch the company you keep when vulnerable. Their impressions can leave craters on your soul. And I think this may be the last one here that I'll share. It's called Let's Start at the Bottom. Let's start at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food and sex, where political parties are thrown on top of our politicized bodies, bartering us and commodity food. It seems we are just commodities too. At the bottom, she is marketed as cheap, convenient, and reusable. Men filled with liquor lick her, and the rest is something we don't talk about. Awaiting the coming of the eighth fire, I inhale cigarettes to fill myself with smudge as if to cope. But systems are now changing, becoming anointed with hope. Let's pray it soon releases the grip on all the women it's choked.
Before we continue, we're gonna take a quick break, so use the restroom, take a quick drink, and you look like you have something to say? All right, yep, so we'll be right back in a few minutes.
So also at this point, I want to make sure to thank the Motion Media and Design Lab who provided us with Ethan, our videographer. Everybody say thank you, Ethan. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jess.
we're gonna get things rolling again. It is now dark outside. I wanted to segue with a poem by Maggie Smith that's called How Dark the Beginning. All we ever talk about is light. Let there be light. There was light then, good light. But what I consider dawn is darker than all that. So many hours between the day receding and what we recognize as morning. The sun crusting like a wave that won't break over us. As if light were protective. As if no hearts were flayed, no bodies broken on a day like today. In any film, the sunrise tells us everything will be all right. Danger wouldn't dare show up now, dragging its shadow across the screen. We talk so much of light. Please let me speak on behalf of the good dark. Let us talk more of how dark the beginning of a day is. And let's bring up Ellie Schoenfield.
Thank you very much to everybody who has organized this and who has ever done anything with poetry, the Poet Laureate program, any kind of community poetry. It's so important to have rich cultural events, and of course I'm totally biased that poetry is kind of one of the best, you know, so thanks to everybody. So let's see. It was really lovely to hear Sheila read. Sheila's gone? Oh, there's back there. Sometimes in the olden days, when Sheila and I would both be at a reading, sometimes we would do this kind of really fun back and forth thing where, you know, we would just have a little stack of our poems. She would read a poem, and then I would think of what poem would follow that, and then, you know, and so on and so on. It was really fun. A few years later, Deb Cooper, who read a couple of weeks ago, and I decided we would do some poetry that way, but writing the poems. So she would write a poem, send it to me, you know, back and forth, and so we've got a manuscript looking for somebody to publish it. So, but anyway, it was very fun. I encourage people to do that. It was really just so much fun. And this is the last poem of that book and has some different images from that book. It's called Overheard. And what will you do with all of that moonlight? A rose invites the mystics, opens you into a boldness you didn't know you had. The prophecies of an 8-inch red amaryllis flower in the dead of winter bloom in your hands. Those shallow, upturned bolds hold everything you need. Black and white keys unlock music, and it's a consolation when the winds of change are finally playing your song. In a world written in stardust, everything glitters. A yellow daffodil is the antidote to a long winter. Birds singing in tongues lick away despair. Loud colors and the chimes of petals opening wake up everything important that might have been dozing off. So now, what will you do with the smoke and flames of all of those poems burning inside of you? So aside from just bringing people together, poetry also has a long tradition of poets making social commentary and otherwise complaining. And I think here in the election season, as I was choosing poems, I thought things that I won't necessarily say. So I went way back to a very old poem, over 20 years. It's probably not the best poem I've ever written, but it's apparently still relevant. Damn it. It's called Barbie, Her Health and Fundamental Rights. When the phone rang, she thought it was Ken or maybe Alan if Midge was away again. But instead, a strange voice asked if she was alone, if this was a good time to talk about some private things. He was Jerry from the health department, calling to tell her she had been exposed to chlamydia, and now she had to go to a clinic. No, they couldn't tell her who had given her name, confidentiality, you know. At first he had thought it was a joke, but he was a conscientious government employee and followed up because chlamydia was wiping out koala bears in Australia, no telling what kind of effect it could have on dolls, and Christmas is right in front of us. Millions of little children and big stockholders could be affected. Barbie was stunned. How could this happen to her? Mattel had always trained her to date and provided many companions to give her glamour and grooming tips. Oh, the tricks she had learned from Malibu Barbie. Why wasn't there a safer sex Barbie who could have slipped her some condoms and avoided this whole mess? When would Mattel wake up? She went to the community clinic because Mattel had failed to provide her with comprehensive health coverage, and her paychecks were small because they told her a steady boyfriend like Ken should be reward enough. True story. At the clinic, she mentioned she'd been throwing up a lot lately and that her perfect breasts felt sore and swollen. Then the nurse practitioner came into the room with antibiotics and the news that Barbie was pregnant. Well, shit, now what? How far along was she? Who was the father? Was Roe versus Wade still intact? Could she get an abortion before the holidays? The nurse practitioner was sorry, but this was a federally funded clinic, and while free speech was the general rule, the Republican fathers decided it was best if women not be told about their legal medical options. But maybe there was a loophole because Barbie wasn't really a woman. No one knew quite what to do next. Anyway, difficult times we live in. So, another older poem. Let me just see where. Also remaining relevant or timely, I don't know. Walking. A Tibetan prayer wheel turns and turns, sends prayers to the universe with every revolution. And now it is my feet, all our feet, walking, one foot, then another, over and over, every step a prayer to stave off the horror at the edges of our stomachs. Every step a prayer, one for the young man murdered, one for each of the killers, one for the people who drove past the intersection and did not stop, one for me in the hope that I would not do the same thing. Every step a prayer, one for the woman found long dead in a house not far from me, one for her killer, one for the others who beat her. Every step a prayer. One for the woman shot down, one for the neighbors who heard the shots and did not respond, one for me in the hope that I would not do the same thing, one for the husband who pulled the trigger over and over. Every step a prayer. One for the people who are buying a gun because enough is enough, because the prayer of walking over and over together is too slow, and the chamber of a gun keeps on turning, sending its message to the universe. It tells the lie that this is the answer, that what goes around comes around through its barrel. A gun demands a sacrifice, an enemy, the willingness to kill. A gun says, follow me and I will keep you safe. I will be there when you need me. I will be there when you think you need me. I will be there when you are not sure, but something happens fast. I will be there. Ask the questions later. Better yet, don't ask the questions at all. Just buy a gun. Shoot first and join in the prayer of the chamber, spinning and spinning, that metallic prayer that stops the feet from moving, that stops the feet from sending the prayers of movement, of walking together, one foot then another, every step a prayer to stave off the horror, every step a prayer of walking together, walking together, walking together, walking together. One time, I used to be in a band, and I did some spoken word, and we were at the Iron Range, and Laurie Hatton, who, if you know Laurie Hatton, is a delightful, delightful, wonderful musician. Anyway, and from the Iron Range, and she wanted me to read that poem. Well, and I did it. I mean, like, what? Anyway. Spiritually, I'm kind of a many paths up the mountain poem, so, I mean no offense by any of the things that I'm saying here. This poem is called Some Things I've Noticed About Jesus. When Jesus fed the poor, he did not ask anyone to produce proof that they were sufficiently destitute to receive the free food. When Jesus healed the sick, he did not deny care based on ability to pay. The rich were not more thoroughly healed than the poor. Jesus did not follow a doctrine of worthy and unworthy poor. He did not say, only love the neighbors you already like. Jesus liked the poor. He hung out with them, talked about them a lot. The poor, the poor, the poor, the poor. He really did go on and on about them, and none of it was hostile or demeaning. Jesus talked to the rich a lot about the poor, encouraged the rich to give up all of their money and all of their stuff to, you guessed it, the poor. Jesus felt very bad for the rich because the odds of that camel getting through the eye of that needle were pretty slim, because it looked so likely that the rich would, in spite of so many warnings, parables, and examples, keep following their money, and then he and his dad would have to tell them to go to hell. I think that is theologically what it says. So ranting. So I did start a poem the other day. I hadn't paid attention to the weather report, and there was 2 inches of snow. But so far there aren't enough words because all the words so far are profanities. So this is an older poem, a couple years from, it's called Late October, as opposed to the middle of October. Wind rushes over the morning, shakes tree branches until the gold of their leaves jump like fish into the great rivers of change. Yesterday's unseasonable warmth blew away in the night. Now steely clouds filled with implications of snow commandeer the skies. There is no stopping these winds who howl and crash over everything. One season heads downstream, another one flash floods in. What time it was when I started. So, I just have 2 very short poems left. I did recently write what I think is a very happy poem. So I'm going to read it. It's called Not Even Sirius, and Sirius is the star, so it's spelled as the star is called. This photo of our sun, purporting to be one of the most detailed pictures ever taken of a star, an extreme close-up, looks rather like fur. Soft golden retriever fur, all swirly and exuberant. A golden retriever retrieving the day from the night, bounding across the sky, a little needy for our attention, but mostly just making itself and us ridiculously happy. I'm very happy to be here with all of you and happy to be reading with Tina, who just had a birthday. So I'm glad Tina is still here. And this is a little poem because, it's miraculous that, so many people, especially once you get to, a little older, so many people are not here anymore. They've moved on. So this is untitled, The Tree of Life Trembles, Shakes Loose Another Year. Somehow we survived, still here. A bird with something in its beak flies by. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Ally Selector Reader, Tina Higgins-Wusso.
Thank you, everybody. This has been so nice. This is our last Wednesday together in this capacity, and I've just really enjoyed it. Thank you, David Beard, for making this happen, and all of his students for helping him make this happen. And thank you, Jess and Henry. And Ellie, thank you for asking me. I was so tickled. And even though this is going to annoy you, I'm starstruck by you, and I always will be. So there. Me too. Yeah, right? I'm not alone. I have a theme. I've never had a theme before, but I'm just going to keep doing this theme until I'm done with it. This is how scars are formed. I could write the words. My father is a coffee mug, chipped along the rim, cracked along the bottom. I can never keep it full. When I take a drink, my lips bleed. I could write that. But someday he might read those words. He might lean across a table toward me so that the deep scar that splits his long nose in half is close enough to examine, flooding my mind with the story of how the scar came to be, how he fell from the tallest tree, how he has always dared too much. In that story, the damage done when he hit the ground throbbed straight through his small face, swallowed whole his tender heart. There was so much blood. I know his mother held his hot skin against her own because that's how very good mothers absorb our pain, and she was very good. I am there with them, while a cloud of gravel dust coats my skin as we, all three of us, rush to the hospital in the old truck, windows down. And I startle when the grown man that he is leans deeper across the table when he asks the question again, since I couldn't hear him the first time, impossible over the sound of the frightened boy crying in my arms. He asks, "What the hell does that even mean?" He pulls open the book, stresses its weak spine, pounds a blunt finger against the page so that each word begins to tremble. Some crack, some vanish. And I was so sure they were built to last. What the hell does that even mean? If I have forgotten, how can I explain the words to him? A small boy fallen, a small boy fallen down, a small boy fallen down and hurt. My dad can beat up your dad. She said, "Tina, there's like a motorcycle in your living room." "It's winter," I explained. And when her expression didn't release, I was forced to continue. "Doesn't your dad fix his Harley in the living room when it's too cold in the garage?" She didn't nod or seem to understand. I stared back at my friend and wondered what kind of dad she had. A boring one, for sure. I bet he wore khakis. What she saw was the frame. Just a skeleton balanced like a long, slim dancer on a heavy, square, oil-stained block. Below that, a flat board mostly protected the carpet, that orange and brown shag, perfect for hiding motor oil mistakes. And when the time came, a gas tank or fender would populate the circumference of the dinner table. I watched him wet sand the surfaces, days and days of work, dipping the scratchy paper into a bowl of water until it ran creamy gray. A machine could not have done it better. He was my John Henry. And eventually the carburetor or transmission or clutch would own his attention. Blackened newspaper, bolts and tools and grease-stained hands, stained sinks, words that other kinds of dads wouldn't say out loud, Band-Aids. Springtime, it warmed enough for the final paint job, out in the garage, of course. Shimmering blue one year, candy apple red another, polished chrome, well-loved leather. And then an early summer Saturday morning sun. A heavy baritone rumble woke me early, his first ride of the season. We could hear him for blocks, going away or coming home. Time enough to quit fighting, kick an unapproved friend out the back door. I haven't asked my brother yet if he still thinks of it. The machine in pieces, put back together perfectly. Heat shivering off the exhaust pipes, Dad's boots, Dad's jacket, a cigarette between his lips, and a bottle of beer getting warm in the sun while he adjusts the timing. What summertime sounds like. How lucky we were. All those years we listened for the sound of him coming home. Now that the sound of him going away has become deafening. I can do it. I can do it. Thanks. If you were at Homegrown this year, you heard this one. A little bit different of a context, though, here, so. Oh, to my feet. You are matter, I am mind. Tickle and pain are easily denied, like my father's slim and ghostly pale, frail bones that will survive, misshapen canoes, sardine cans. My third taste of life after air, after water, earth absorbed into my soul's the source of mobility. I am not a tree. Twice I have broken you. First, the unlikely second toe, the balancer of volley and stumble. Then the metatarsal. How, dear ones, have you survived? Even in dreams I run, run, run. Broken first in anger, then in joy. To you and the universe broken is broken. Blood thumps at the strong and tender curve of arch, threads of tendon. If I pay attention, I can sense the most minute sensation, a vibration, a molecular wiggle. My father would lay on the couch, legs crossed at the ankles, and rub his feet together, a mindless caressing. I have his feet, his chin, his nose, his pride. The body he left behind is ash now, but I am temporary flesh, blisters, callus, cracked bone, cold, sweat, ingrown, ache, spasm, healing, at rest, alive still, alive still. Thank you for each pending pilgrimage, for the lift from sea to stars. I will take care of every detail. I will wrap you in wool. I am mind, and for now I am of you, as I will always be of him. Thank you for the journey. Thank you for the defense. This is the newest poem I've written lately. It's just the newest poem I've written. Not lately, because that doesn't make any sense. I wasn't going to write a new poem for this because that's stressful, you know. I was like, I'm just going to pick ones that are already done and not worry about this thing. But then this poem came to me, and I just had to write it down because it was on theme, first of all, and because it's about my dear dog, Henry. Some of you might know Henry, or at least seen him on Facebook. My husband likes to post pictures of Henry. This is my last poem. Trying. Henry the dog has become very old. When I lift him now, he is dust, he is air, he is hollow bone and bitter breath. He resents younger dogs and birds and shadows. He sleeps like the angry dead and rises with sudden force, a geyser, a furious siren. His voice makes every stringed instrument in our small house ring out. Each day he gets lost in my office and has a screaming match with the ghost of my father, who must sit in my mid-century modern chair because that's where Henry points his rage. But Dad is gentle now and smiles easy. Henry always wins. I look through photos to see if I can watch him leaving in increments, but the only sign is a gray-blue glaze slowly forming beneath the surface of his left eye. Algae taking claim of a lake, grease cooled, opaque. Not like Dad. Not the wasting, the emerged bones beneath my hands when I touched him. Dad says, "It'll be okay, kid." He says, the quiet will swallow the memory of his voice. Soon you will sift through dark night after dark night to forgive the part of yourself who has forgotten the young friend who loved naps and being close enough to touch, who outran every dog he ever met, who could not be trusted with a garbage can, a refrigerator door, or a bowl of rising dough. I don't know what Henry needs from me now, and that is our shared problem. One day he was annihilating the air from his perch on the couch. I entered the room and yelled his name loud enough for his ancient ears to pick up the faraway pitch of my competing despair. He stopped and let quiet hover between us for one breath, 2 breaths. But still he gripped in his stare every obscenity that has ever been uttered and leapt off the couch. He didn't step off the edge like a penguin steps off a glacier. He was outrage, a swinging bat, a fist. He sprung off the couch into the quiet he had briefly allowed, and I couldn't reach him before he hit the hardwood floor, before his legs collapsed in unison beneath his body. And I thought, through the sudden overwhelm of my grief, if my dying father had been a dog. I lifted his dry bones, the madness of fur and heart, his dying starred eyes through the shallow, stunned air that held a deniable whimper. The sound could have come from either of us. We were both bruised inside and so very tired. When I laid him on my bed, he looked up at me and saw me and knew me and licked my chin. He asked, "Where have you been? I've been calling out for you all day." "I'll try to do better," I told him. "I'll keep trying." Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the third of the Duluth Poet Laureate series. There's some books over at that table. There's also information about the Duluth Poetry chapter at that table, so feel free to check out those 2 tables as you mingle and make your way out. Thank you.